For lunar Sabbatarians, the Sabbath has to be a feast day. According to them, Leviticus chapter 23, verses 2 and 3 says that it is one. So let's take a look at those two scriptures. So this is God speaking to Moses, and this is what he wants Moses to tell the children of Israel. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, concerning the feasts of the Lord, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations. Even these are my feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of rest and holy convocation. Ye shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. So here is their thought process. In verse 2, God says, these are my feasts. That word feast comes from the Hebrew word moedim. Immediately after that, God mentions the Sabbath in the very next verse. So people think that God is listing the Sabbath as the very first feast. This is what I call the location argument. Basically, the Sabbath verse is located right after verse 2. So this is how they perceive the categories. They believe that the main category is the feast days, and that the Sabbath is an item within that category. Basically, they perceive that there's a hierarchy here, the Sabbath being under the category or underneath the Moedim. So after establishing that the Sabbath is a feast day, they then apply Psalm 104:19. Now, this is the verse where David says that God appointed the moon for the Moedim. The connection is easier to see if I use the original Hebrew words. So again, the thought process is, number 1, the Sabbath is one of the Moedim. Number 2, the moon is for the Moedim. So 3, the moon is for the Sabbath. As I stated in part 1 of this series, the difficulty with Leviticus 23 is that we've been given a lot of days in this chapter. We've been given the Sabbath, the feast days, holy convocations, and a list of annual feasts. I think that we're having a categorization problem. I'll just call this the category problem. To me, this entire issue boils down to lunar Sabbatarians putting the Sabbath in the wrong category of days. It's kind of unbelievable, but this really is what this whole controversy boils down to. The good news is that we're only given 4 types of days in this chapter, so it shouldn't be too hard to figure this out. For starters, the Sabbath is obviously in the category of Sabbath. But being a Sabbath is not enough to connect you to the moon. You need to be a feast day for that. So the Sabbath as an option is irrelevant here. The Sabbath is obviously not a yearly feast. Those are listed in verses 4 through 37. And we learned in part 2 from our deduction exercise that the Sabbath stands outside of those days. So that option is also out. So this really only leaves 2 options to choose from. Either the Sabbath is a feast day or the Sabbath is just a holy convocation. Let's go back to our location argument. On the surface, this seems to be a very strong argument. But is it taking into consideration all of the information we have in these 2 verses? I don't think that location is the only way to figure out which category to put the Sabbath in. When we read these verses in full, I think we can find another dynamic going on here. In our situation, we were given 4 types of days, and we're trying to find out which category one of them belongs in. So what are we attempting to do? We're trying to categorize things. When it comes to the Bible and most things in life, really, It's not enough to just know what you also need to know how you know it. How do I know that my claim that the Sabbath is being miscategorized by you all is true? In a situation like this, how do we know who's correct? For this, I think that we refer to rules or principles. Did we each reach our conclusion by following the rules on this subject? So I'm going to give you a very simple rule to use to tell if you have put the Sabbath in the proper category of days. This is the rule to use when you're given multiple items and you're trying to find out what category they belong in. And I guarantee you, everybody watching this video already knows this rule. Here it is. The common characteristic is the category. The common characteristic is the category. So the method is this: identify the attribute that each item has in common with the others, and that is the name of the category. Let's test this rule to see if it's true. What is the category? I think it's pretty obvious what the category is. How did we determine the category? We looked at the characteristics that each of these items had in common with each other, and we determined that the common characteristic was the category. All right, let's go through this. Each item here has a football. Each item has a football uniform on. So we determined that these are all football players. The category is obviously football players. It's pretty easy. Okay, what if instead of objects, I gave you items to read? What if I gave you names of people and I asked you what the category was? What would you name this group? Based on what? Okay, it would be based on what each of these people had in common. In this case, it's the same last name. They all have the same last name of Smith, so the category is Smiths. So far, our rule seems to be holding true. Okay, now before I end this video, I want to talk about one last thing. I want to talk about something that I believe can be causing confusion. We don't want to get the items confused with the category. So I want to give some definitions so that we can make sure that we're not doing this. The items are the parts that make up the category. The items are in the category. So, in situations where it might not be obvious for various reasons, which are the items and what's the category, we can rely on these formal definitions to help us. Okay, so again, the items are the parts that make up the category. The items are in the category. The items can also be defined as the things that have the common characteristic. Do you see here how every item has the shared characteristic of the last name Smith? This is how you can tell the items from the category. Items do not go into other items. In other words, items don't go into the category of other items. I can't stress enough that you have to be able to distinguish between items and categories. Again, the name of the category is the common characteristic that all the items share. I think these are all the category rules that we need to resolve this dilemma. In our next segment, we're going to test out these rules on Leviticus 23, verses 2 and 3, and see if it's true that the Sabbath really is in the category of feast days. Remember what we always say: if the Sabbath is not in the category of feast days, we absolutely cannot link it to the moon.